Well, good morning. I'm happy to be among the first to tell you that spring is here. It arrived at 12:30 this morning in the Eastern Time Zone. The arrival of spring is also known as the vernal equinox, that moment when the sun crosses the equator on its way north. And here's a fact you may not know unless you're a TV6 viewer. This is the earliest that spring has arrived in our lifetime. We don't have time to tell you why this story happened, but it's a fact. Of course, it's also a fact that spring in Upper Michigan usually doesn't go by the calendar, but I'm thinking this year, thanks to El Nino, it will. But let's get to the real business at hand. We started serious logging in Upper Michigan in the mid-1800s, and we've been at it ever since. How are we doing today? We'll find out more about that right now.
From TV6, this is the Ryan Report. Now, here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, Michigan was the nation's leading lumber producer between 1869 and 1900. In the early days of logging, there were few roads. Logging companies built camps and brought in crews. Most of the cutting was done in the winter when it was easier to move the logs to water. And after the spring melt, the logs were floated down the rivers. We've come a long way since then, so this morning we're going to explore what's happening in logging today and talk about some of the challenges facing the industry. We're pleased to have Jim Carrie from Carrie Logging with us this morning. Jim has been in the logging business for almost 40 years, and his family history in this business goes back a lot further. Jim, welcome to the Ryan Report.
Thank you.
Nice to have you here. Your grandfather was actually in the logging business, if I remember right.
My grandfather had a sawmill and some loggers working for him when I was just a young boy, and his father had their first logging camp where LP's mill is right now in Sagola.
Okay. So you've got, but that history kind of broke, didn't it? Your dad didn't stay in the logging business.
My dad and his brothers, I think, were a smarter generation. They all went and got jobs. My dad's a retired state trooper. His brothers worked in the mines and for the highway department.
Okay. And you didn't jump into the logging business initially. You actually worked for the Natural Resources, Department of Natural Resources?
Yeah, I worked for some contractors right out of high school, and then I got a job with the DNR as a park ranger. And then I got promoted to a fire officer, worked in Nobbemway, worked on the Seney fire for 10 weeks, and transferred over to back to Champion, Michigan. And they couldn't keep me as busy as I'd like to be, so I started doing a little bit of excavating and logging on the side, and it just kind of grew.
And you actually started in the excavating business?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then kind of worked into logging, and that was about, what, 1980 or so?
About 80, I started, I took a leave of absence from the DNR and tried logging, and I liked it so much. My former boss, Mike Paluda, I asked him if I could take another leave of absence the following winter, and he wouldn't let me, so I quit and
okay. So
started logging.
Let's talk about your company today. You're really into a lot of things, aren't you? It's Jay Carrey Logging, but you're into logging, excavating, and what all is your company involved in?
Well, we do a lot of land development. We build roads for developers. We clear land. We clear farm fields. We have a grinding service. We grind wood waste products for fuel at power plants and paper mills. And we have several different types of logging crews with cut-to-length harvesters and tree-length logging, a lot of trucking.
And how many people do you employ in your company?
I think 37 or 36 people,
okay.
Full-time employees.
Okay. And who are your customers? And I don't mean by name, but kind of by category.
Well, there's power plants that we provide fuel chips for, and sawmills and paper mills and OSB mills that we provide pulpwood products for, and saw logs.
Okay. And we were talking before, but you know, the landscape has really changed. I use the word landscape, but we're talking about literally and figuratively here, I guess. But you know, I can recall when the paper companies owned the land and own the trees, and now it's a whole different situation, isn't it? Well,
before the paper mills were run by paper mill people, and they owned their own land, so they had a good source of timber all the time. They always had a backlog of timber that they could cut on land that they owned, and then they just had to buy some wood on the open market to supplement what they had. So it gave them a little safety valve. Now none of them own any land, and if they get low on inventory, they sometimes have to do drastic things to fill their mill yard with wood, and that's usually pay a real high price. They pay a real high price. Short term, it's good for everybody, for the loggers, because you can get more for your product. But then the price of stumpage, the wood that we buy from landowners to harvest, that price also goes up. Then the mill yard gets full of wood and the price comes down and you're stuck with high stumpage prices.
Let's reminisce for a minute first, you know, before we go on. Obviously logging was very different in your grandfather's day. Did he share any of those memories with you?
Well, the old days of the horses and freezing the roads. One thing that when we build roads in the woods now, if you can find an old road that the old timers built, that's usually your easiest route.
Really?
Because they didn't have the equipment we have, so they had to plan ahead a little bit better. Now we can go anywhere with the equipment we have, but if you just take a little time and watch what they did and follow their tracks, it makes life a lot easier for you.
And they were lumberjacks, I guess, in the sense.
Yeah, they lived in camps, and we were on a tour in Sweden one time, and we were in an old logging camp. And back in the days when the horses and the men stayed in the same buildings, and when they give us a tour, she told us all about it, this tour guide, and she says, "What's missing?" And we all looked, we couldn't figure out what was missing. She said, "The smell." Can you imagine what it smelled like in a barn with lumberjacks and horses living in the same building? And even in northern Maine and in Canada, they still use lots of logging camps. The men leave their home for the week and go work all week, and then they come back on a weekend. And we're fortunate enough here that we do sometimes travel quite a ways to our job sites, you know, 50, 80, 100 miles sometimes, but everybody's usually home at night.
You don't have the horses living with you either.
We don't have the horses.
No,
we don't have the horses.
You got a lot of horses, but they're all in some machine. Speaking of which, your industry has to be a very capital-intensive industry now.
Yeah, it's, I think to buy a new harvester, we got several harvesters, but to buy a new harvester now is right close to $600,000, and then the forwarder that picks up the wood behind it is a little over $400,000 for a new one. So it takes a lot. You have to have a good relationship with your banker.
When did we stop logging with chainsaws?
We still use chainsaws.
Well, I realize you still use them, but kind of as the main tool.
Yeah, probably. When we first started, we had chainsaws and we cut trees by hand and then picked them up with a small bulldozer and a forwarder. But we couldn't get enough wood cut, so we started with the feller bunchers. Right. And it just, now with these new harvesters, we hardly need a chainsaw on the job, just to trim the loads, trim some of the brush on the loads.
Okay. I have a lot more questions. We'll get to those in just a minute. Back with more on the Ryan Report after we take this break. Our guest this morning is Jim Carrey, Jay Carrey Logging, been in the logging business for approaching 40 years. We were talking just before the break about the equipment today. It is kind of amazing. You were telling me a story about how much wood you can cut with these new machines.
Yeah, we have two of our guys, one's a subcontractor, one's an employee, been with us like 35 years, but they went to a job about a week ago they thought there was 250 cords there, and they said, well, they'd get it done before the restrictions went on. Well, they come to find out there's close to 500 cords there, but they worked day and night, and they got the job cut and got it hauled and all taken care of. And
how long would it take to cut 500, cut that much wood in the old days of the chainsaw?
A good guy years ago could cut about 10 cords a day.
Okay.
So it'd be a long process.
Yeah, it's just amazing seeing some of that equipment at work. In that sense, too, the people who work for you, aren't lumberjacks in the old tradition. They're really heavy equipment operators, aren't they? Heavy
equipment operators, but they have to be a pretty good mechanic, an electrician, troubleshooter. They have to have a good lay of the land. They almost have to be a forester. Our company is big enough that we have 2 full-time foresters, good managers. My succession plan was to work for a few more years, but because of some health issues at home, my son stepped in and was going to take over ultimately, but 2 years ago he stepped in and took over and is now running the place and hired some good managers to help him, and he's growing.
And you and I were at a meeting recently where a common theme was finding qualified people to do jobs. Is that a problem in your industry as well?
It seems like there's people out there, but I think there's so much government help for people that they don't need to work. When we were young, if we didn't work, we got hungry, and nobody seems to get hungry anymore. And I think that's a big part of the problem. If you can find good workers, good young workers, and train them, We got a young truck driver. I've known him all his life, known his parents all their life, and we got him trained in a truck when he was 18 years old, and he's one of the best truck drivers you could ever find right now. He's got a good work ethic. You don't have to push them, they just push themselves and they get the job done.
You know, and these are some of the jobs that have disappeared from the American scene. And you know, they were the jobs that really helped create this middle class. And you know, there's a great emphasis now on everybody getting a college degree, and certainly, you know, that's important. But we also have to, you know, there's a whole movement toward career technical education, and we certainly need people to do other kinds of work as well.
Well, there's the building contractors and the road construction people that are like the champion gunlocks of the world. These contractors have so much work now, they don't have enough people to fill the jobs that they need to perform these work. This new money that's going to help our infrastructure, build new roads and bridges, the contractors that are going to perform these tasks can't find enough help. If all this money comes through in a short period of time, there's not enough people out there to do the work. There's people there, but we do need to train more people in the trades in hands-on type of jobs.
Let's talk about the forest industry. It's always been a big part of Upper Michigan. And you know, the thought struck me that in some ways it's similar to the iron mining industry in this way. You're both at the beginning of the chain, you know. The decisions are made out here as far as how those products are ultimately used or purchased, and you have no control over that. But you're there at the beginning of the process to provide that raw material.
We're at the beginning, and from our end of it, the people that buy the products, the people that buy, you know, there's a lot of anti-logging people, anti-mining people, but they don't realize that the products that we provide and the mines provide are products that they need, not only want, but need every day in life. The computer parts in these cameras are all mined or logged.
Right.
You know, a lot of people think when they go to the grocery store and buy hamburger that it comes from the cooler in the grocery store, but actually a cow and a pig have to die to make this hamburger, you know.
Right.
Toothpaste is a wood product people don't realize. Rayon is a wood product that people don't realize. You know, we don't use much film anymore, but film for your camera is a wood product.
Okay.
The chemicals, medicines, and the components that's used to put them together are wood products, and people just don't realize that.
And obviously there are, you know, basic things like furniture and building materials and paper that are all part of the forest products industry.
And you know, the years ago they said the crews come through the UP and eradicated all the timber, and now, you know, we have better timber now than we've ever had.
I did read a statistic that we have more timber than we've had in the past, and we continue to grow more than we harvest.
Yes. And you know, you can drive down the highway and see a clear cut that you don't like and don't know what the history is behind the clear cut. A good story, Tom Casperson was driving truck, hauling wood for us about 20 years ago, and we did a huge clear cut right across the street from K.I. Sawyer, right in the highway, on the highway going into K.I. Sawyer. And there was letters to the editor in the paper complaining about this clear cut that we did, and people didn't like it. It was on state land, and it regenerated itself. It was all jack pine, and all the jack pine came back by itself. And now when Tom goes through that same area with people he's working with, he'll tell them that all the uproar, public uproar on this clear cut now is one of the most lush forests out there.
Okay. We have to take one more break. I'll be back with more with Jim Carrey after we take this break. And again, we're talking with Jim Carrey, Jay Carrey Logging. We were talking just before the break about not everybody is a fan of the forest products industry. What do you do to change that?
Well, I think the industry itself should do a better job of educating the public, from the little kids in school, the high school kids, college kids, you know, local communities. Even our legislators have to we have to educate them on the benefits of the good, healthy forest. And leaving a forest grow and die and go on its own is not healthy for the forest. We have a lot of problems with insect and disease and drought and spruce budworm, and you know, good logging, good forest management can help eliminate a lot of those problems and still provide products that we all use and need on an everyday basis.
And it has quite an economic impact. I did have a statistic here that each ton of wood harvested generates about $100 worth of economic activity, and They estimate for Michigan that's about $1.3 billion. So that's
It has a big, I think the forest products industry in the Upper Peninsula has a bigger impact than actually the mining industry does.
Okay. There have been some issues, obviously things like the Verso bankruptcy. These are concerns going forward?
Years ago, it seemed like the paper mills owned land. They were local. They had roots in the community. And now that they've sold off their land and they're run by maybe bean counters and people that are detached from the local community, we don't get the same effect that we had before. There's no real local connection, it doesn't seem like. It's maybe a Wall Street connection rather than a local connection like we had years ago. And that, without good, healthy, thriving market for our products, like all the mills in the UP, we can't manage the forest. And if we can't manage the forest, if we lose the paper mills, we have to find some other source to sell our products in order to keep the forest healthy by managing it. Maybe local power plants, in each different community, regional power plants or something.
And the way the industry works now, you actually buy the timber and sell it to those companies, right? In the old days, they owned it and you logged it for them.
Well,
you or someone.
We always were on the open market, bought our own wood. We had crews occasionally that worked for the big land holding companies, and still we're doing a job for Weyerhaeuser right now. But a lot of times they owned all the land, and most of the wood came from their own land base.
What's we don't have much time left, but what's if the forest product industry is important to Upper Michigan, what's the biggest challenge you have to overcome to keep it strong and healthy?
Finding good help, finding wood at an affordable price, and keeping a steady market, stable market for our products. That's the biggest things.
I know one of the issues at one time was the fact that much of the land is owned by private individuals, in many cases large companies, but there are also small landowners who haven't taken advantage of the opportunity to harvest their lands. Is that still an issue?
It's still a bit of an issue, but we've got two pretty aggressive foresters, and they go out and contact a lot of private landowners, and they find mostly what we cut is on private land.
And just looking at some statistics, in the state of Michigan, the state owns about 16% of the land. Is the state making lands available for harvesting?
The state is, and they're actually doing a little bit better job right now than they have in the past, but I think there's a lot of room for improvement. Some of the sales that they put up now, we go to look at, and there's a lot of fallen down timber that maybe if they would have cut it 5-10 years earlier, there'd be a little better quality timber to cut.
And I understand the problem may be even a little worse on the federal side?
It's substantially worse on the federal side. There's a lot of times you'll go cut a federal sale and have to, especially in a spruce budworm, a spruce balsam type of stand, half the trees are dead because they waited so long to harvest it, they're laying on the ground dead.
It's an important industry. Thanks for coming in and talking to us about it.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll be back with more on the Ryan Report, some additional thoughts after we take this break. Well, this year TV6 marks its 60th anniversary, and as I mentioned on an earlier show, from time to time I'll share a little history or a personal memory from earlier times. Today it's a memory. Let me tell you about an event that was unique in the history of television in Upper Michigan. As time passes, there are fewer and fewer people who remember the March of Dimes telethons on TV6. But in their day, they were something special. More than simply a telethon, it was a UP happening. This was a huge undertaking for a local television station. It started at 11 on a Saturday night and was non-stop until 5 or 6 on Sunday evening. The cameras were never turned off, and there were no breaks to cut away for a national segment. All of the entertainment on the show was provided by local talent appearing in the TV6 studios, and that could range from a little old lady reading poetry to a rock or country band performing popular songs from that era. And when the entertainers weren't performing, someone had to be standing in front of the cameras talking about the work of the March of Dimes and carrying out a constant appeal for pledges from the viewers. My first involvement was in 1966 when I took on the role of one of the on-the-air hosts. Each year the show also featured some very special guests. members of the Green Bay Packers, which made it even more exciting. This was during the Vince Lombardi era, when the Packers had outstanding teams, which meant some great football players appeared on the show. Men like Ray Nitschke, Max McGee, Henry Jordan, Willie Davis, Gary Knaffel, Bob Skoronski, and John Brockington are some of the names that come to mind quickly. Charlie Sanders from the Detroit Lions also joined us. They all had a good sense of humor and were great to interview on the telethon, but the most fun was listening to them slaughtering the names of people calling in pledges. They also had a problem with some of the UP town names. Ontonagon and Baraga come to mind. But no matter, they were a great addition to the show. One of the biggest problems was the volume of sound in the room when one of the bands was playing. The TV6 studio was well sized for regular programming, but it was stretched to the limit during the telethon. Trying to get organized and setting up future interviews was very difficult to do when you were trying to hold a conversation while a rock band was playing very loudly right next to you. One of the really great things about this annual event was the support provided by so many people. It started with dozens of volunteers who helped to make it all possible, to the thousands of viewers who called in their pledges to support the cause. On next week's show, I'll have one more telethon memory as we hear about a very special performer who people waited to see every year. But for now, having had a chance to be part of this is something I'll not forget. As I said at the beginning, this was more than simply a TV show or even a telethon. It was a UP happening in every sense of the phrase, and it took on a life of its own. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Well, it's about time to wrap it up for another week. Thanks to Jim Carrey for coming in this morning to talk about logging and the forest products industry, which has been important to this region for many years and continues to be a major contributor to the economy today. Hope you can take some time today to get out and enjoy the first day of spring. So far, it's off to a pretty good start. I want to remind you that this show is also available on the internet. If you miss it or want to see it again, you can see several recent episodes at uppermichigansource.com. Just click on the Features tab and then the Ryan Report. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. The Today Show is ready to roll. Thanks for joining us today, and I hope you can join us again next Sunday morning.